I have always loved vampires. Sorry mom, it wasn't a phase. Which is why I'm super excited to be bringing you this list. Welcome back Nerd Squad, I'm your host Amanda McKnight. Join me as we count down the top 10 most powerful superhero vampires and celebrate some of the best undead heroes the world has to offer. Let's fly vampire bat dial into it. Number 10. ManBat. ManBat is kind of like a vampire in the main continuity of DC, but definitely is a vampire himself in the Gods and Monsters reality. In that alternate universe, Kirk Langstrom is the one who becomes Batman, though his origin differs from the one that we're more familiar with for Bruce Wayne's Batman. In Gods and Monsters, Kirk becomes a pseudoscience vampire after a cure for lymphoma, which he tested on himself has monstrous side effects. While cured of his cancer, Kirk is also seemingly transformed into a vampiric being, who must feed on blood to survive. While initially repulsed by the monster that he has become, eventually Kirk would go on to become a hero who even decided to feed on criminals, seeing them as fair bait. Number 9. Angel. Angel is a vampire who hails from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or the Buffyverse if you will. While Angel does have a darker side, his original vampire persona of Angelus, he is generally considered on the side of good, at least in his angel persona. Generally, in the world of Buffy, most vampires are just inherently straight up evil. But as with many other monsters in this world, that isn't always the case, and some vampires are more complex individuals. Angel happens to be one of those, as he is a vampire with a soul. Pretty unique stuff. In the television series, Angel only originally got his soul back as a curse. This was after he had killed a young girl who was part of the Calderesh people. Distraught, the community sought revenge, and got such revenge by placing a curse on the vampire. In having a soul, Angel was able to feel guilt once more for all the crimes that he'd committed and the pain he'd caused. This led him down a path of redemption and made him a hero, doing heroic deeds to help make up for all the evil he had wrought. Number 8. Jubilee. I know we don't think of Jubilee as a vampire now, but there was a good, pretty long time in the comics that she actually was one. Jubilee as a vampire not only had access to her mutant powers, but also became a lot more physically strong and somewhat durable. She did have vampire weaknesses though, and would eventually return to being an average non-vampiric mutant in the end. This all went down because Jubilee was using an amulet to allow her to walk safely in the daylight. However, when this was removed from her person and destroyed, her teammate Quentin Quire sacrificed the piece of the phoenix within himself in order to save her and cure her of her vampirism, returning her to regular old Jubes. Number 7. Morbius. Despite sometimes being painted as a villain, Morbius is not that. He's more complex than that. If anything, he's more anti-hero or full-blown hero in modern comics, though he does sometimes become overtaken by his bloodlust, which is honestly what usually makes him evil. In most cases, Michael Morbius doesn't even want to be a vampire. In fact, there was a time in the comics that he was cured for a good while. However, just because he wanted to be cured didn't mean that he'd stay that way. Morbius was introduced as a villain because he needed, or believed that he needed, Spider-Man's blood to cure him. So he was pretty much almost immediately at odds with one of Marvel's most famous superheroes, which, you know, kinda made him a villain for a while. Morbius as a pseudoscience vampire and hero has super strength, speed, can leap quite a distance, and is also gifted in the art of gliding, but not flying. He can jump, he can glide, but he can't fly, to be clear. As a vampire, he's also immortal. He's also a science vampire, so a lot of typical vampire weaknesses don't apply to him. For example, he feels pain from sunlight, but just because he's super sensitive to sunlight, it doesn't mean that it'll actually kill him. So yeah, he's just like, no, don't like that. He's like me first thing in the morning when I walk out of my basement that I live in. Number 6. Vampire Batman. Vampire Batman makes his first appearance in Batman and Dracula Red Reign, and is known for being a part of the Red Reign universe, which is categorized as Earth 43. Here, Bruce Wayne is still Batman, but after attempting to hunt down and stop Dracula, gets turned into a vampire himself. He holds out for as long as he can, but is eventually forced to give in to his bloodlust. As a vampire, we actually get to see a version of Bruce Wayne who has superpowers, which is pretty neat stuff. Of course, the one tragic thing about Batman as a vampire is he also gets all the weaknesses of one. Wah wah wah. And I do really mean all the weaknesses, including garlic and holy symbols, which I would say actually a good number of the vampires on this list are not weak to, so yeah. Number 5. Blade. Blade is not specifically a vampire, but is a dhampir, meaning he's in essence half vampire, half human. At one point in his history, he was one of the most famous cinematic characters we had from the Marvel Universe, because the Blade franchise actually precedes all other Marvel franchises we had that came our way on the big screen. Blade is awesome, and is probably one of the reasons I first fell in love with vampires as a kid. Blade was honestly probably one of the first films I saw that centered around vampires, and showcased how they could be bad, but how, like Blade, they could also be a force of of good. Blade has gone on to even join the Avengers in comics. That is how influential and powerful he is. He gets his powers from his Dhampir physiology, and as a Dhampir isn't vulnerable to quite so many weaknesses in comparison to Marvel's vampires. However, he does still need to consume blood or his own synthetic blood-like serum, which he actually prefers, and while not vulnerable to yellow sunlight, he is vulnerable to red sunlight, so he does need to watch out for that. Number 4. Vampirella. Vampirella is one of my all-time favorite vampires. She is interesting because, well, she has a few different origins. Honestly, all of her origins are good, but one of my favorites for her, albeit now somewhat outdated, is the one where she's an alien from the planet Draculon. And so while she appears as a mythological vampire to us here on Earth, she's really just from another world where being a vampire is considered normal, because that's their whole alien thing they do. Vampirella is extremely durable, strong, and fast. She can move so quickly that you wouldn't even be able to see her, you would just see a blur. She can also fly and isn't susceptible to some of the weaknesses of your standard mythological folklore vampires. For example, it's believed you cannot kill her by staking her through the heart or by decapitating her. Number 3. Marceline the Vampire Queen. 3 and 4 were just another couple of points on this list that I really struggled with ordering. Honestly, I struggled with ordering a lot of these people, so if you feel like you disagree with my ordering, totally fine. I was struggling with it. It's pitting 2 of my favorite female vampires against one another for these 2 points, for 4 and 3. But I think number 3 rightfully has to go on top when it comes to these 2, and that would be Marceline. Marceline the Vampire Queen hails from the animated universe belonging to the Cartoon Network series created by Pendleton Ward, Adventure Time. I love Adventure Time. It's such a great series, both as a bizarre kids cartoon and just as a story, narrative, and honestly like a character study. A lot of the characters featured in this show are much more deep than they seem, and it's got that fantastic music. Marceline, for her part, is the daughter of Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil and ruler of the Nightosphere, kind of like Adventure Time's version of Devil or Satan. She gains some power from her demon heritage, including the ability to feed on souls. She has an insanely long lifespan due to her heritage and dramatically slow aging, and also gained a bunch of abilities from absorbing the souls of powerful vampires. She is weak to sunlight, but it takes some time to do some damage on her, and she also does have healing abilities, so if you put her out in the sun for a bit, she'll probably be fine. She can also go out in the daylight as long as she stays in the shade or has her parasol with her, because then she can just carry shade with her. However, she does also need to feed on red. If she goes unfed on red, she goes into a feral state and can potentially feed on the red that exists within her friends, aka their blood. Number 2. I Vampire. It was really tough picking the top spots for this list, I gotta admit. I had difficulty ordering all of these characters. For me, it was a strong toss-up between Andrew Bennett and then the number 1 spot that I inevitably went with on our list for who would actually take that top spot. Andrew Bennett is known as I Vampire, or I Vampire, however you want to say it. He made his first appearance in the New Earth continuity in House of Mystery issue 290 in the 1980s, but got a makeover for New 52, appearing for the first time in the Prime Earth continuity in his own series, I Vampire issue number 1. Honestly, he is a really underrated character who deserves more hype. He's definitely one of the most powerful vampires in the DC universe, despite what DC versus vampires might make you believe. He can shapeshift, heal, is virtually indestructible and immortal, is super strong, has telepathic abilities, can hypnotize and even potentially control minds, has magical powers, and while the sun weakens him, zapping him of his vampiric powers, it does not actually kill him, which is pretty cool. Number 1. The Vampire Lestat. Probably one of the greatest vampire superheroes of all time has to be the Vampire Lestat. Sure, he's not in a comic book. Or wait. Actually, he is in a comic book, or rather, a graphic novel. That's right, there are actually comics and graphic novel versions of some of the Vampire Chronicles. The Vampire Lestat, I believe, even got one. It may have even got 2. I'm not completely sure on that. Although I believe those series in general are more a one-for-one adaptation than like an actual reinterpretation for that specific medium. In other words, I'm not sure how good they are. Honestly, I just found out about them and I read a little bit and I was like, what is happening? What is this? How have I not found this before? But regardless of the Vampire Chronicles comics, the novels by Anne Rice are iconic in the vampire scene. They are probably one of my all-time favorite interpretations of vampires in general, and of course, embarrassingly, I fell head over heels in love with vampires like Lestat when I first stumbled upon these books as a teenager. Lestat has power not just from being an older vampire, but also from drinking from the oldest vampire around, Akasha. After feeding from her, he became even more strong than he naturally was from age, and also the blood of his maker Meg Magnus and his natural disposition. It is implied that he was kind of just suited to be a strong vampire due to what he was like in life. He also basically becomes the most powerful / god of vampires on Earth after he consumes Macare's brain, becoming the host of the sacred core, the source of the dark gift. And to clarify, Akash is actually not the oldest vampire, but she's one of the oldest vampires, so, you know, she's really old. Who is your favorite vampire superhero? Do you prefer your vampire superheroes in comic, novel, film, or television format? Which type of vampire in terms of myth and folklore do you think is the most powerful type? Let us know in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight, reminding you as always to stay nerdy, YouTube.